If you want to watch me, the over-the-shoulder look at how I go through the research process, you can. I know if I were learning this for the first time, I'd like to see somebody actually go through it. So I have not, other than Micron, I'm not familiar with these other companies. So this will be in real time, the amount of time that it takes me to go through this process, and it can give you an idea of what the actual research process looks like. So I'll pull up my stock selection worksheet, which, as I said before, will constantly be changing and improving for you, so it may look different than what it does now. I'll switch over to the research tab, which will have pulled over these 5 companies that we're going to look into. I have Uncle Stock up so I can reference if I need to look at some of the numbers again. I'll usually look at Simply Wall Street. I'll have Seeking Alpha up. I'll at least look at those 2, and then I'll have Google if I feel like I need to dive in anymore. And so I'll use Simply Wall Street just to get a visual picture of the company. And then I will use Seeking Alpha to see if I can find some of the negatives if they've been highlighted already. I'll go ahead and pull up a clock so you can see how long it takes me to go through the process. It varies. I will speed it up and then I'll slow down whenever I've made a decision about each of these, and I'll slow it down. I'll let you know what I found and why I'm either going to decide to not invest, or the ideas that I want to keep top of mind as I'm going through the rest of the analysis process, things that came up in my research that might be most alarming, like the reason it might be suppressed and I think it might be unjustifiably, so I'm going to keep that here so that I can keep that in mind when I'm looking at the catalyst, when I'm looking at the analysis. All right, with that, I think that's probably all the context you need. Water's always advised. You might want some snacks. If you're going off of 4 hours of sleep, I'd recommend something to keep you awake. That's why that's there. And the phone is probably not advisable. All right, I'll go ahead and start the timer, and let's do this. Alright, so I finished my research, WDR. Had a lot of good things going for them. There were a lot of things that I noticed that made me intrigued. I was excited to look into it further. At a 4.7% dividend, their ex-dividend's coming up here in 9 days, so I wanted to get in if I was going to ultimately decide it was a good company. They have a great balance sheet, impeccable balance sheet. But then I noticed that there were a lot of insiders consistently selling off, and currently I put a lot of insider ownership, but that's not correct. It was a significant amount of institutional ownership. And the insiders are selling off, and they're in. So I noticed that perhaps The reason that the stock was so suppressed is because in a melting ice cube industry, they're selling mutual funds, and that's obviously a more difficult sell at the top of a bull market. And if you look at how the stock performed, it performed very well up until 2014. So after a crash, people started flooding into actively managed accounts, and then we had been in a bull market for a long time, and so people started exiting. And so I thought that was the reason initially when I was reading that, and that would be a compelling reason for me to invest, as this could be a good defense against the market crashing. If the market crashed, then people would flood back away from passive. I mean, that will happen. They'll leave passive and go back towards a more actively managed approach. But as I continued to dig a little bit, I realized that their mutual funds just aren't performing well. So it's not just that the passive over active, it's just their active funds are not even that great. So I've studied FII better, Federated Investors, and I saw the comparison drawn between the two of them. And so you can see I pulled up and compared them and realized that if I was going to get into this space, then I would go with FII. They have a similar, their balance sheet also looks impeccable. Their dividend is slightly less, about 4.5%. And they do also have insiders that have been leaving. I talked about them in a dividend video before, but they also had just recently a really big insider purchase, which is more of an indicator than insiders leaving. So anyway, so I'm going to take WDR off the list, even though they had impeccable, like their numbers here were pretty incredible. But when I realized the reason that it's selling off mostly has to do with the company's just not doing what it's set out to do very well. That's not something that's unjustifiable suppression. So anyway, all that time, about 40 minutes, got one off the list. Let's go to the next one. Ready to rule this one out. I mean, it's an interesting business. It has a lot going on. It has zero debt, so I'll keep it in the back of my mind. But it's just not going to have 100% upside. It's kind of a fledgling business, from what I can tell. Whenever I see that, then I start to look for catalysts early on, which is something I talk about in the later module. And I talk about the importance of knowing what you're ultimately going to be looking for, because when I see a flat chart or a chart that just keeps coming, like keeps reverting back, I mean, this chart just keeps coming back to the middle here, to its mean, except for at 2000, obviously it took off, but it's just kind of hovered around this. It's just been flat on the big picture. I mean, you could maybe swing trade this, but that's not really my thing. Whenever I see that, I start looking for a catalyst from that point, and I can't see anything that would cause it to take off. And so if I can't find a catalyst, then I'm not going to spend time assessing its upside potential, because nothing, even if I thought it had 100% upside potential, it's been flat for so long. It needs something to wake other investors up to its value, else it's going to continue to stay flat. So I hope that makes sense. But for that reason, because there's really just no catalyst. That one did not take near as long. yeah, when you're doing this, it's a lot of it. It should just be how you feel. If you were excited to research it, and then as you start to research it, you find yourself not as excited anymore from what you're reading, that's a good sign that maybe it's done. Uh, you give it a shot, and if it doesn't feel right, then don't force it. So, all right, so let's move on to the next one. Hopefully we can find one. So ESIO. I'm ready to make a decision on this one, at least from a research perspective. I want to know more about ESO, and this is the problem. It's not the exact same every time. So, I wish that this fit into, exact mold. So I could give you an example of a stock that had something that had happened in its past that caused it to be suppressed. Things we've talked about before, things that, special situations. That's not always the case, though. It doesn't have to be one of those situations for it to fit into my three categories. It had a really great quarter, and so it jumped up quite a bit, and it's come back down to those levels, and I can't figure out why. That may be a bad sign, that may be a good sign, I don't know, but it's something I'd like to look into further. So I'm going to keep it on the list and see if I can figure it out as I compare it to its peers and dig a little deeper in the analysis phase. There was a catalyst, a potential catalyst. They're entering a new space, and so that could, if that goes well for them, and during the analysis, if it turns out that they're priced for them to not do well in that new market, then that could be a catalyst for a significant surge, potentially further than before. So I'm going to leave that on here. I'm going to make some notes real quick.
Speed it up and out.
Okay, so yeah, I'm going to keep this one on the list. From my reading, there's perhaps a potential catalyst once I dig a little deeper. So I think it's worth looking into. I haven't had a chance to compare it to its peers, obviously, since we're just in the research phase. So I'm curious to see if it seems pretty undervalued based on the metrics that we looked at before. So if it has that potential of 50+% upside, and it has very little debt, so I'd be curious to look into the downside. I think it could satisfy that criteria as well. So again, remember, the point of the research phase is just to see if you can figure out why it's suppressed, and then to see if you can find a reason that it won't satisfy one of those three criteria. ESIO, I can't find a reason where I can be pretty sure that it's not going to satisfy those. It still could. So I think we'll look further into those, and let's go ahead and go to NPO and see where that takes us. think MPO looks like a company that it could be a good value stock. I don't think it could possibly have a 50% upside. It has some good things going for it. It seems, compared to a peer that I've studied before, SPX Flow, which is a spinoff company, so that's why I'm familiar with it. I'd say that MPO appears to be more undervalued than Flow. So by comparison, the one thing that I took a note on, I mean, there's obviously, I think this is all Mario Gabelli, but I lost my back camera. I think his battery must be dead, but that's what I get for recording a 2-hour session. Mario Gabelli seems to be accumulating a lot of shares, so maybe you get an activist in there, and that could drive growth. Like I said, it looks like it's undervalued. It does look like a value opportunity. It looks like something that somebody with different standards might pursue, and maybe I'll come back to it at some point. But for me, when I think about whether or not it could hit 100% upside, at a minimum 50% upside, I don't think it could, and I bet its downside would also be more significant. After all that research, I'm not super excited about it, so I'm just going to go ahead and cross it off the list. And so I didn't have any, I prefer to find special situations, a reason that it's suppressed, as you know. That's more exciting to be able to dive into and see if it's justified or not. None of those were. Usually one of them is. But anyway, this was a real example of me going through the research phase. Yeah, so my clock's at I'll move it up on this screen. My clock's at 1 hour and 43 minutes. So I hope that gives you some insight into the amount of time it takes me. It probably takes me a couple hours to get through one of these research sessions, which isn't crazy. And if you're honest about it and try to be strict with it, you won't waste too much time. You could, depends on your schedule. You could fit that in once a week or once every other week or 30 minutes at a time over every week. So that each month you're maybe pulling out one stock that you want to do an analysis into. There's no pressure to make anything happen anyway. But if you're doing it more actively, then you could do that in a day, and every day, and narrow in on one or two stocks that you want to start to analyze. So anyway, that gives you an idea of how long it might take. That was how long it took me to go through 4 of these stocks and come out with one that I want to dive into. I'm afraid that once I get to the analysis phase, I'm going to quickly rule out ESIO, but we'll see. And if I can find comparable companies, then we'll take it through the comparable company analysis in the next module. This will be the stock that I do. If I can't find comparable companies, then maybe I'll find a different one to take through the process for you, because I want to show you the full process and not just stop at the very beginning, which is if you can't find any comps, then maybe you should find a different stock. We'll do that in the next module. I hope this was helpful, and I wish you all the best. Take care.